Okay, and thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon. I would like to welcome you all to Managing Remote Workers Performance. Just a few logistical things while we're during the webinar. If you have any questions, you can put those questions in the Q&A box available, and you can also chat in questions that you have as well. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Sarah and Suzanne, who will be your presenters for today.
Thank you, Alicia.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sarah Skoronsky. I'm the Principal Consultant at EOS Human Resources Consulting. We offer HR consulting and services to small businesses and help them manage their employees and manage the performance of their employees. And as we shifted from in-person workers to a majority of in-person workers to now a majority of remote workers, there's a lot of differences in how you have to manage people and how you have to keep people engaged. And so we wanted to spend some time today talking about some best practices in terms of dealing with issues that come up and how to deal with disciplinary conversations and performance-based conversations with employees. So welcome everyone, glad to have you here.
And hi, I'm Suzanne Kress. I'm the newest HR consultant on the team. I have about 15 years of experience in HR, doing a wide variety of things. And I really like focusing on employment law, which means this is a great time for me because there's some new law every day. And promoting mental health in the workplace. And in this presentation, part of that is going to come up here because COVID is such a unique time, unprecedented, as they like to say, that you don't want to forget about that aspect of your employee being a person. So, but yeah, I'm so happy to be here, and I hope that you enjoy our talk.
Thanks. So today we're going to be talking about the shift to remote work and what are some things that need to be considered when you're working with people remotely that are different and might be different when you're working with them in person. Setting expectations for those people, having the difficult conversations. We'll actually go through some of the things you need to consider about that. The considerations when you actually have to fire a remote employee, and then just some ongoing remote work considerations as well. And to start with, and I'll caveat a lot of this is, I've done another webinar series with a business partner of mine with Freedom Makers, Laura Renner, and we have gone through in depth a lot of things about keeping engagement with your remote workers. And so if you haven't already looked at those, I encourage you to kind of go back and review that. But in general, and kind of a summary of that is that when people are working remote, it's very different because you're not really counting the time in the seat. You're counting how productive they are and what the end result is. And so you can, if you give people the authority and the responsibility and the ability to be creative and to get the work done, you can actually get more out of a remote worker than you might out of somebody who's working in the office. A lot of times when we talk about people working in the office, they're scheduled to be in the office for 8 hours or to be working for 8 hours. And in reality, we know that they're not working for 8 hours. They're working for, maybe 4 or 5 hours. And then there's, chatting with their coworkers or, going to and from meetings. And, but when you have remote workers, it's much more specific time, much more focused time. And so you can really utilize that and encourage your remote workers to be more productive and to have more productivity time when you're basing that on the output, not on how much time they're actually spending working. So anything you want to add to that, Suzanne?
No, that was great.
All right.
So this slide is of a survey done by Harvard Business Review. It was actually done a while ago, so this is not representative of right now today, but I think it's pretty close. And so I want to make sure that those managers out there understand that remote work is not the same. You don't feel the same as an employee. You don't do the same work. It's even though your employees may be productive at home, it's still not the same. So they asked remote working employees or employees working remotely, do you agree with these statements or not? And it's funny because I find that as a remote employee, I'm not as worried about colleagues, doing things behind my back and lobbying against me. It's way less for me at home, but for these folks, they said it was more so at home than in the office. So you've got somebody at home and they're not seeing their cohorts in person, and then they just start thinking things. Maybe they're typing in Slack and they're used to just talking to each other one-on-one, and then they misinterpret, and all of a sudden they get worried and paranoid. And so I think that's something to realize, is that employees are not just cruising because they're at home and it's easy. It actually is more worrisome for them as a person that's not in front of their colleagues.
Right, and they don't have, because they don't have the ability to kind of feed off the energy of other people,
Mm-hmm.
and they don't hear the water cooler banter or the break room banter.
Mm-hmm.
There is that human instinct, it seems, to feel like, oh, they must be talking about me, or they're out to get me, or and another thing that you have to be really careful about when you have remote workers, especially if you have some people working in an office and some people working remotely, so you have a mix, is that a manager can very easily assign something that's the responsibility of the person who's working remotely, but because they want it done now, they need an answer right away, they ask somebody that they can see instead of going to that remote worker. And so now that remote worker feels undermined. And so it's really important to make sure you're being very specific and being very intentional in how you're managing people, so that the remote workers don't feel like they're being left out, or that they're being ganged up on, or that people are talking about them, or thinking that they're not doing work, when in actuality it may be that people are not giving the work to them because kind of the out of sight, out of mind.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really important, as I was saying, to establish really strong roles and responsibilities for your employees. And this starts with setting up a cadence, setting up a battle rhythm or a drum beat, or whatever terminology you want to use, of regular check-ins and regular sequencing of things. And so at EOSHR, we have a cadence of daily check-ins where, as a group, we are checking in with each other, where that's our time to really brainstorm when we have issues going on with clients, hearing other people's input, getting another perspective, and making sure that we're all on the same page, so that if there's something that might be going sideways with a client, whether it's with their employees or with a client overall, then we know about it and we can react to that quickly. On a weekly basis, we do more of a business meeting where we do trainings, where we have specific times to do trainings. We do goal setting for the company. We do we create kind of, again, that rhythm of what do we need, what do we want as a company to accomplish, and doing regular check-ins on that. And then on a monthly basis, I do a one-on-one check-in with each of the staff. And this is a chance for me to check in and make sure that they're doing okay. For me, this was my first experience managing remote people when I decided to go into consulting, and I decided to start hiring people. And so having you normally had people in the office right outside my door, it was very different to have to talk to people every day, or just talk to people every day, not have them physically by me, and being able to manage that. And so it was important to me to make sure that I was setting up that time where we had one-on-one time, and we can dig into the good, the bad, and the ugly, and make sure that we are on the same page and moving forward. So those are ways that we internally have created that drumbeat for our check-ins, and making sure that the employees, my employees, are set up for success. We also have metrics, and this is really important. You know, if you can't measure it, how are you going to hold somebody to it? And I actually, so I've been in consulting for 6 years now, and I was looking through one of the very first presentations I did when I started consulting. And one of the things that I said is that in that presentation is that if you don't actually set an expectation, if you don't define what how you want things done, or what you want done, things are going to get done, but you can't really get mad at how they got done. You can't be upset with the fact that it wasn't done the way you wanted it to, if you didn't define those metrics, and if you didn't define what your expectations were. So having that really clearly defined makes it hard for somebody not to follow the path, and not to know what they need to do. And then the lanes of responsibility and levels of authority, these are two terms that we used, and we dove into deeply on the Remote Strong series, but making sure that people know where they're supposed to be going and what direction they're supposed to be going. And Laura who was the other presenter, she had a great analogy of, you know, when you're driving down the highway and you're going along at 65, 75, 85 miles an hour, and you notice that a car is drifting off and drifting towards you, all of a sudden everything around you changes, and you have to adjust, and it's a kind of a panic moment. And that's the same thing when you have lanes of responsibility in work. If somebody is drifting off their path, all of a sudden you have to figure out, well, wait, am I supposed to be doing this? Is somebody else doing this? Who's responsible for this? And it creates all this anxiety. And so you really want to make sure that you have that clearly defined, and you stay in those lanes, as I was saying, as we were talking about before, of, you know, if you have a mixed culture, or a mix between outs or remote and in-house employees, you need to make sure that if somebody who's working remotely is responsible for something, that is their lane of responsibility, and you don't try and crash into the lane, or have somebody else crash into their lane. And then the last thing on here is the levels of authority, and making sure that people know how far they can go before they need to check in with you, so that people can continue to work even when they're remote, and know when they hit that point of, like, okay, now I need to talk to the manager now. And you know, my staff knows this pretty well, of like, okay, now I need to ask Sarah about this. And there's a lot of things that I don't find out about until the daily check-in call, and then things move forward. But when they have that knowledge, they can continue moving forward and making decisions.
Great. And you know, one thing I wanted to mention, Sarah, is that a manager doesn't need to feel like they have to put this on their employees. This can be a dialogue. This could even be asking your employees, you tell me, how often do you want to meet? What do you want me to measure? What are your expectations? Do they match mine? It can definitely be, you know, a group effort. It doesn't have to be just, you know, you telling them. So
Right.
I think that's important.
Yeah.
And you know, we'll talk a little bit about personal time later, but back to that Harvard Business Review study, 1 in 4 of the respondents who are remote workers said that managers who insist on FaceTime were way more successful than those who didn't. So also remember, when you're talking about those regular check-ins, Sarah, that we do as a team, we do them via Zoom. And we know when it's going to be on video, and we know that we need some of that FaceTime together as well.
Right. Yeah, because especially if you're working at home alone, you need to see people. You need that human interaction to keep going. So keeps you motivated.
For sure. Um, we talked about defining the expectations. This is, a way to get into it a little bit more. Um, One of the things that remote work policy, not everyone has one. I am not a huge fan of writing a policy for everything that comes up. But if you never had remote workers before, or you never thought to write a policy before, this is really the right time to do that. And it doesn't have to be some kind of stuffy corporate type policy. It's just setting aside a few guidelines, such as you need to be available from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. You need to have your email on. You need to respond to calls within 24 hours. These are because if your employee isn't doing those things and you don't have a policy, it's kind of hard to refer back to something to say, but look, I told you that these were the requirements when you're working from home. So it's good to have something in place, a policy to fall back on if, and that's why we're talking today, they are not performing well while they work from home.
And just to kind of add to
Mm-hmm.
that is this is also goes back to what you were just saying about having it be a dialogue, because maybe if the work allows it, maybe they're not going to work from 8 to 5 every day. Maybe they're going to work from 8 to noon and then take time off because they need to do something with their children, and then they'll come back to work. So that's where you have that dialogue and that conversation and be able to come to an agreement together about what that policy is.
For sure. And we've talked about metrics. Something has to be able to be measured. Me as a remote employee, I have to know whether I'm doing a good job or not. I have to know what the goal is so that I can know if I'm meeting it or not. So that's an extremely important part of, explaining that during this process that there's still that performance management. It doesn't go away because the person is at home. And when you kind of work through what you're going to measure with your employee, you want to remember that you're trying to focus on the results, the objectives, not on how they do things. We talked about this a little bit before, but when someone's working from home, it doesn't matter if they do it at midnight or at 6 a.m. or with kids screaming in the background, or if they deliver, they deliver. And so you don't want to judge them based on how they got there. Somebody who is working remotely, I mean, you don't see them. So you don't have any idea what's going on for them at home. And so guessing what they're doing is not going to work very well, or saying, well, they probably work outside most of the day and I wish they wouldn't work outside. If they get their done, they meet their objective, their work done and meet the objective, then you don't really have a leg to stand on. So
Right. Right. And again, this all goes back to what the business needs. And so, using that example, if they can do their work outside, that's great. But if they live in an area like I live right near the freeway and I can't take calls outside. So if I'm on the phone all day or if I'm doing, Zoom calls, I have to be aware of what that surrounding is. So again, setting that parameter of yes, you can work outside when you're not doing client facing work, or yes, when you're doing client facing work, you need to be in a space that is amenable to a conversation with the client.
yes. And when you're used to working with someone in person, you might give them feedback because it's easier. You could just quick step in their office, or maybe they quick stop by to talk to you about something else. And you can say, oh yeah, I loved what you did the other day. But when they're remote and you are not sitting in front of them, it's important to remember they still need the feedback, because all of that will lead to a performance review at some point. And you don't want there to be any surprises in a performance review. You want to make sure that even though that employee is remote, they get that constant feedback. And it can be, I mean, obviously, feedback about, you know, what they could do differently, what they could do better, but also feedback about, wow, let me know what you think about the team. Let me know what you think about me managing. All of that will help you kind of get a pulse of, you know, what's going on for your employees. And I also think that it's important for your employees working from home to self-evaluate. So again, you want to ask them, how do you think you are doing? How are you? How is your life at home? And allow that person to let you know if they're doing well or not, because you might not be able to tell on video or a phone call or Slack. So you want to make sure that you ask for that. It is like feedback, but really this is a part of the whole performance review process, where the very first thing you're going to do is ask that person to review themselves so that you can see if what you feel matches up with what they feel. So if you already know that up front, it'll be easier for you to manage the performance going forward. And then one thing I found is remote workers tend to ask their managers for little things more often. So I bug Sarah, I'm like, oh no, I forgot the login and I need the code. And that's just annoying, because if I would just take the time to go figure it out myself, then it would save Sarah some time. So it's important to teach your employees, is there an intranet? Where do you go? We have several different places that we need to go to get information. Asana, Streak, Box. And so that was the first thing I had to learn as an employee, so that I knew where to go to find the answer, so I didn't have to constantly message Sarah in Teams to find out what I was supposed to be doing.
And the other side of that is to be patient with people, especially if they're new to remote work and they're used to having, you know, their coworkers right there, or they're not sure, you know, when you hire somebody, so, you know, as Suzanne said, she's the newest member of the team, and their main connection now is going to be with the manager. They're not going to have as much connection with the coworkers who they sit next to, who they're not sitting next to. And so you are in a way their support system. And so making sure you empower them to look for the answers themselves, but also making sure that they are engaging with the rest of the team and going to them to ask for support as well, to build that team camaraderie is also very important.
Yeah, because if you just complain that someone's bugging you all the time, that's not really going to get you anywhere. So it's a good idea to think of, are they bugging me all the time? Is it fixable? If I just took a minute to show them, or if I just asked their coworker to show them, would that help in the long run?
Yeah. All right. So the first part of talking about difficult conversations is the things that happen, whether you're doing them remotely or you're doing them in person. And so these are just some best practices that are good to have when you need to sit somebody down. And the first is to have a plan. Know what you're going to say. Don't go into a difficult conversation, you know, emotionally charged, because then things can get said that you cannot retract because they're out there. And so you want to have a plan. You want to know what exactly you want to talk about. Anytime you're having a conversation with somebody, you want to be specific. And when we talk about being specific, it's being able to give somebody an example of what happened that is now bringing this up. So you don't want to tell somebody, you know, Joe, you're rude. It's like, well, that doesn't help Joe, because Joe doesn't know why you think he's rude. You have to be able to say, Joe, when you say that, when you tell these horrible jokes about that are off color, that is inappropriate and we need you to stop doing that. You're giving them a specific example of what they may have said and what action needs to stop. If you make it too ambiguous, they're not going to be able to stop your because they don't know exactly what you're talking about. Um, and so you want to be as specific as possible. You want to have those examples. You want to be able to refer back to them and tell them how they can correct that action if possible. You want to make sure you're scheduling a time. You don't want to you don't want to like delay this out. You really don't want to say, okay, on Monday of this week, I'm not going to think about a conversation I want to have next Tuesday, because now you've got a lot of anxiety around it. But you do want to schedule a time and make sure that you have the time to prepare beforehand, and that you have and that you can sit down and have that conversation with the person, and you're not just giving them 5 minutes of your time when they may need to process through and ask you questions. Again, you want to think of what the outcome is. Are you having this conversation because you want to eventually fire them? Are you going to fire them right now? Or do you want to, or do you really want to help them grow and help them become a better employee? And then the last thing is to practice. Make sure that you go through what you want to say, kind of have an idea of how you want to approach it. If you have an HR department or you have an HR consultant, call them and walk through what that conversation looks like, so that you can feel more confident going in and talk about, have some ideas of, well, what if they say this, and what if they say this, and what do I want my outcome to be, and how am I going to respond to that? So these are all some of the things that we work with our clients and making sure that they know how to have these conversations with their employees. Anything you'd like to add to that, Suzanne?
No, I think you'll see. So on the next slide, Sarah just went over things that we would ask anyone to do as a manager. And there are some things that are the same, whether you are sitting in front of that person or that person is working remotely. But there are also some very key differences. And so we wanted to make sure that you are aware of these pieces before you have those difficult conversations. So just like we said that the best practices for in-person include in-person, when someone's working remotely, I think people feel tempted to just send them a quick email or shoot them a note or an IM or a Slack that says, oh, yeah, I really didn't like that email you sent, because it's way easier to have a difficult conversation over email, over Slack, because that conflict in person is gone, and people do not enjoy conflict in person. So what you need to be able to do is, if you sense yourself giving that type of feedback or starting those difficult conversations via email or or text, I've seen too, you need to be able to, yeah, you need to be able to stop yourself and say, no, I need to do this in person. I can't do this in person. So what's the next best thing? Well, again, like we're doing today, a Zoom meeting, a Zoom webinar. And the number one reason for this is not just because it's better, is because, as you can see on the slide, only about 7% of communication between each other is actual verbal exchange. Way more of it, and this study said 55%, is body language. So if you can't see, like for example in this video, I put my hands down so that you're not distracted by what I'm saying. But if you did, you'd be like, oh, she's very animated. Oh, look, she's smiling. Or you want to be able to catch those nonverbal cues from your employees. The only way you're going to do it is by doing a video meeting. And you're going to have to let the employee know in advance that it's going to be a video meeting. Because if you don't, and the employee just figures, I'm doing a Zoom meeting with my manager, I'll just keep my camera off, and they're in their pajamas, if you get on a call with them and say, okay, push your camera on, that's not really going to go very well. So make sure you tell them in advance. And you can tell them, I want to be able to see your reactions to things. I want to be able to feel like I'm talking to you in person. So try to mimic the in-person as much as possible. And remember, they are not at the office, they are at home. And it's COVID, and many other things are happening right now. So this is a new normal. So it's not something that they're used to. And sometimes having a difficult conversation with someone who is just having a difficulty with the transition is not going to help if you just, come in and say, wow, you're just not doing your job. In this case, you kind of need to have a softer approach and say, wow, this is a time of uncertainty. What are your thoughts? How are you doing? That's very important. Think about all those parents out there that, for example, I have children and my school district has not yet made a final decision about what they will do starting in August, which is when our fall semester starts. So I have a great deal of uncertainty. I don't know if my children are going to school or staying at home or hanging out with their friends or where I'm going to be or where I'm going to put them all day. And that's heavy. And that uncertainty is heavy. So remember, this time in particular, if you have employees working remotely and their children are at home and that's not usual, they may be different just because of that. And then otherwise you wouldn't have to have a difficult conversation with them. And finally, you want to think about your management style. And if the way you manage works in the office, it may not work for people who are remote. I think that, when Sarah started hiring people for her consulting firm, she had to think of a management style that would work well, knowing that her employees were not sitting in front of her or sitting next to her. And if you take a look at your style and think about if that would be pertinent to people who are working from home, great. But it's important for you to be able to change if that will help. For example, if your whole thing is giving high fives and woohooing, it's not going to work. So be open to maybe looking at how you manage.
Yeah, I think it's a great point of it, you have to be able to adjust, and you can't expect that the way you did it before is going to work forever, and you can't expect that once you try something that's going to be the be all end all. For myself, I've been in an evolution for the last 6 years, basically, of learning how to manage remotely and how to work with employees, and both my own and my clients' employees, and being able to have those conversations and be clear and be compassionate to the fact that this is different. This is the new normal. And then be even more compassionate to the fact that the past 4 months, 5 months have been insane and have been, we're dealing with things that we've never had to deal with before, and giving people the latitude of, okay, this is just a bad day. This is, I'm having a hard time. I just need to be able to pull it together. And I just need some support, whether it's backing off or actually stepping in and helping with whatever work needs to get done so that they can focus on their own self-care. So those are important things to think about when you're shifting and you're having difficult conversations with people of like, it may not be a hardcore performance issue. It may be, hey, I'm worried about you. Are you okay? What do we need to do to make sure that one, you're taken care of, and two, the work gets completed as well.
I think managers who have a tough time with this are the managers who say, oh, you don't bring home into work. Home stays home, work stays at work. Well, guess what? They're working from home.
They're working from home.
So
home is in work now.
and maybe you don't want to know personal details about your employees, and that works for you. Well, now you can see my book collection, you can see the picture of my cat. Now you know about me personally. And so, and that actually might help in your relationship with your remote worker, whereas maybe you don't need that in the office, but it's there now that they're remote.
Right. All right. So when you do have to make the decision to fire a remote employee, do not do what's in this image. It should not be a crazy flip out kind of situation. You want to deal with it the same way that you would in person, which is respectfully, which is quickly and directly. So again, this is a difficult conversation. So as we said before, you need to make sure that when you have this conversation with them, that they know that they have to be on video. You want to make sure you have everything ready beforehand. For California employees and depending on where you are, you want to look at what are the final pay requirements and have that information ready. So in California, you have to, if you are terminating somebody, you have to have the final pay for them that day. Otherwise, there could be penalties a lot on top of that. Now, technically, you're also supposed to give them the final pay in a check. Well, that's not possible when you're doing a remote work. So either you need to run payroll in advance so that they get a direct deposit, or you need to write a physical check and have that FedEx to them and have that ready. And it becomes kind of a timing issue of like, you want to make sure that you have a conversation with them before they get their final check. You don't want them to like wonder, okay, I just got something from FedEx. I don't know why. Here's my final check. Why are you doing this? Why? And you haven't even had that conversation. So make sure that you have everything set up, that you have a plan. Like with any firing, you really cannot do this in a, I'm going to make this decision in 30 seconds and now you're fired. You have to be very thoughtful. There are so many steps that you need to make sure that you're taking, even more so when you're doing this remotely. So make sure you have all your documentation in place. Make sure you're prepared on how you're going to have the final pay. Make sure that you set up a time to speak with them, and keep it confidential. You want to try and have somebody else witness that conversation, but make sure that you're maintaining confidentiality so that it doesn't become a rumor mill kind of thing about what's going on with the employee. One benefit to doing a remote termination is that if you are doing it on something like Zoom, you actually can record that conversation, which could be a double-edged sword, but as long as you're doing everything compliantly, now you have video proof that this is what you said. And when you are having that conversation, again, similarly to when you're doing it in person, you want to be brief and you want to be specific. We're letting you go today. This is your last day. Tell them, are you giving them separation? Are you giving them a severance agreement or a severance payout? Are you giving them, what are the next steps for them? What should they expect? Know all of those steps so that you can go over that with them. And make sure they know, is this a layoff or is it an at-will termination? Layoff generally means that you're not going to be rehiring for that position. You're eliminating that position. So you want to be careful using that terminology if it is actually an at-will termination or a termination due to performance issues. Anything you'd like to add to that, Suzanne?
We tell folks to document.
Yep.
And, in this time, of uncertainty, in this weirdness of COVID, now it's 10 times more important, because if you have to fire someone at this time, it's going to be very hard for you to reach a point where you're comfortable doing that, because you feel bad. This is terrible.
Yep.
So you have to be able to get documentation so that you can look at it. And when you're thinking, well, I can't fire them, you look at it and you say, yes, I can. I look at all of this. I think it's time. But you won't be able to do that unless you have any documentation, because you'll be too afraid to do it, because
Right.
this is a rough time.
Yeah. Yeah. And as with any termination, whether it's remote or in person, as Suzanne said, you want to have everything ready before you make that decision. You don't want to, I mean, everybody has a bad day. You don't want a situation where they did something bad, and yes, it was wrong, but you don't want to make that quick decision to terminate, because there could have been other circumstances that you just don't know about, and if they're uncovered, you could become liable for a lawsuit, and those can get very pricey very fast. So some other things that, just some other ongoing considerations for remote employees. Suzanne, you want to go through those?
Yeah, I have come up, it's my thing, so if you want to use it, that's fine. The 3 E's of remote work: equipment, engagement, and encouragement. So the first one, and seems simple, and when we do these webinars for our folks and clients, we are trying to give you concrete, actionable items. You don't want to just listen to us talk. So one concrete actionable item is to find out if your employee has the equipment that they need. I've seen companies just do a survey to everyone who's working from home, and they ask maybe 2 questions, which is, do you have what you need? If not, what do you need? So that they can get a sense of what's working, what's not. You know, maybe you think it's fine that they have a laptop and a phone, but what if you expect them to be on these Zoom meetings, but they don't have a very good microphone and they don't have a very good camera? Well, you know, and that might really just hinder their ability to do those things. And no, I'm not necessarily talking about a huge expense here, but if someone could use a second screen, for example, to help them, I've seen that a lot. Or maybe now that they're working at home, the ergonomic setup is different, and so they need a different mouse or a different keyboard. Then just do it. Go for it. If that makes them feel better, great, because then they will be a better worker.
And keep in mind, just to jump in here, Suzanne, that that you know, 2 different things. One is that if you have them working from home, you don't have to pay for rent for an office space for them to be housed in. So there's a reduction in cost for that. So you can and keep in mind that rent is it's an ongoing expense. You have to pay it every month. But if you take some of that money and buy them a desk, buy them a good work station chair, buy them a good monitor that they can use in their home, and those tools that they need, now that's a one-time cost that is going to save you in the long run. The second thing is, if they're saying that they don't have good internet where they are, and they can only afford I don't even know what the options are now, the lower speed of internet, but there is a higher speed internet option available, then maybe it's up to you to pay the difference of that to make sure that they have a high speed internet option available, that they're not on some dial-up kind of crap thing that they can actually get online, they can actually do their work. And we've talked to clients where, sometimes they get a hotspot and that they can purchase, and that way it's something that if the person leaves, then it gets turned off, and it's not a big deal. So, when you're talking about equipment, think about not only the cost, but the benefit that will come out at the end.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. I heard a lady recently on a podcast say that she bought a brand new mattress and that is now her office because she loves it so much. And it was a
That's
good
not
equipment.
ergonomically correct, but okay.
No, but she knew she needed some new equipment.
Hmm.
So the next part is engagement. So if this is the best way I can describe it. So let's say you're in the office and you see your coworker and they look down, they look upset, their body language is telling you this. Then they send you an email and it's not the nicest email, but you feel sorry for them. You know they're having a rough day, so you will interpret that email accordingly. So now you remove all of that. You don't know if this person's having a bad day or not. Maybe they let you know, at some point in a meeting or in an IM. But if you don't know they're having a bad day or something's going wrong, now if they send you that same email, now you're pissed because you don't know.
No
And
context.
yes, so remember that again, that's a key difference, and you definitely want to make sure your employees are engaged with each other to be able to know those things about each other. One thing that I've seen work pretty well, and we were talking about this the other day for our little team, is a virtual co-working day. So basically, everyone joins a video conference and it just stays on all day.
Mm-hmm.
You can be on mute, but you can look up and say, hey, you can see each other and you can see each other working. And then every hour on the hour, you demute and you start talking about, hey, this is what I'm doing. Oh, I wanted to ask you that. Back on mute. So I think that can be very motivating for people who, especially the ones who are lonely, who just need somebody there.
Right.
It's a pretty easy thing to do and can be very effective.
Yep.
And the last one, encouragement. I mean, again, we think about your employees who were at the office and abruptly now are working from home. You want to be able to empathize with them and that they must have some type of stress or anxiety. And it's very important to ask them how they're doing. It will make a big difference if you ask them that. Even if you just say, tell me about this remote work thing. How is it working for you? And by basically offering the encouragement, the emotional support to say, I'm here for you, I'm going to listen to you, it can really help somebody who's working from home, and then you can kind of say, oh wow, don't worry, we've got this. I support you. Maybe they need to hear that type of thing. So I think that'd be important. And another piece of encouragement is we mentioned it before, if you're used to kind of doing high fives at the office, that's not going to work right now. So make sure that you think of things outside the box to encourage your team, whether it's the virtual meeting. I recently saw a website called Kudo Board, where it basically takes the card that you get and pass around the office for everyone assigned to give to an employee and digitalizes it. And you can go online right now and make one for free. It's pretty cool. So just think outside the box when you're thinking about that encouragement piece.
Yeah, and it could be simple, usually I try on Friday afternoon as I'm kind of wrapping up and signing off, I'll just throw a GIF in our team platform just to be like, hey, great job this week. Thanks. Have a great weekend. Just keeping things fun and light and keeping people engaged. So whatever you can do to keep that engagement, I think is good. All right. And so other things for ongoing considerations, we talked about making an investment. And so it might be in physical items like a new equipment for them, but it could also be in trainings, or it could be in doing, there's so many things now. And I think all of the software developers are going crazy now because they have all these ideas about working remotely and now they can actually put them into play. But there's different ways that kind of what Suzanne was talking about of having a working together day or working together time. There's different programs that can do that. There's different trainings that people can do, and offering to invest in people's professional development, whatever you can do to try and help them feel like even though they're not sitting next to you, you actually are still engaged with them and you still are trying to help them grow professionally and personally. um, you also want to make sure you're building trust, doing whatever you can to create those bonds, and to recognize good work. So when things go well, when things, we were talking about our daily check-in calls, making sure that you call out when somebody is doing something well or has achieved something, because again, you don't see it. You're not in an office where you hear about it, and so you need to be intentional as the manager to call that out and make sure people are aware of it. Anything else to add to that, Suzanne?
Well, I think one thing that I was reading about with remote work is there are many managers who pride themselves on having an open door policy. Again, how are you supposed to do that remotely? Well, you can. If your employees know that they can reach you all the time, then, and I know that takes a little bit more effort, but then you're maintaining that open door policy. It's okay if you're on the East Coast or the West Coast. I'm still here for you. You can shoot me a text. You can call me on the phone. You need your employees to be able to always count on you. And yes, that's a little more extra effort on your part, but if they know you're there for them, it is as if you have that open door policy.
And it could be something as simple as doing the reverse of that, of letting people know when you're not available. So like my calendar is open to everybody. They can see when I'm in meetings or when I'm doing things. And if I have to actually walk away, or if I'm going to go run an errand during the day, I'll actually say I'm signing off for a little while, I'll be back, so that they know that I'm not available. And pretty much any other time I am available if one of them reaches out to me. So making sure that you set those boundaries, and then you work within those boundaries so that people know how and when you're available for them. All right, so I think we're wrapping it up here. I do want to let everybody know that in California and in a number of other states, there is a requirement to do harassment and diversity prevention, or I'm sorry, harassment and discrimination prevention training. And so that is something that we do offer at EOSHR. We do online live webinars, and they're interactive, and for people who have watched or participated in this webinar, we are offering a 25% discount. So there's both an employee and a supervisor level training. And if you go to go.eoshr.com/safe workplace, all one word, you can purchase this, and you can use the discount code WFH for work from home, and get a 25% discount through the end of July. And we are also doing the very last of our Remote Strong series, where we are going to be talking about the technologies that we use in managing our workflows and managing our systems. And so that will be next Thursday, July 23rd at 2:30 Pacific. And so if you'd like to register for that, you can go to go.eoshr.com/technology. And with that, we will open it up to questions. Alicia, are there any questions?
So we currently don't have any questions. We did have comment from one of the attendees, and just schedule is when it comes to his office schedule when it comes to checking in, which is, they're a small office, they have 3 people, and so every morning they check in at about 9:45, and then to just go over, what they did yesterday, what they're doing today, and then on Fridays they put in an extra 15 to 30 minutes to just recap the whole week and kind of review what they call their scorecard, with everything going on. And so it's just really good to, even, we're a small company ourselves. So with having a small office, it's great to be able to have a predictable check-in schedule so that people kind of know that you're going to have some engagement scheduled throughout the week.
Exactly.
That's
Exactly.
great to hear.
Yeah.
That's all about accountability, and that's why that's smart. When we have our weekly check-in, I know what Sarah's going to ask me. She's going to say, "Where are you at with this? Where are you at with that?" And so I know it's coming. So if I haven't had it done, if I'm not done, I need to have a good reason why, because I'm accountable for those projects.
Right.
Right.
Great. All right.
And so, yeah, there's no questions now. We got a few thank yous, and I think that's all.
All right.
Great.
Well, thank you so much for joining us for another episode of our HR Power Hour. And we'll do this again in 2 weeks. And I think we're going to be talking about professionalism in the workplace and how that extends to working remotely and what that looks like. So that should be an interesting conversation as well.